So it's riverpod time, because I want to manage my places in some app-wide state that can be accessed by different widgets from any place in the app. For that, I will have to install this Flutter riverpod package about which you learned earlier, and this can be done with flutter pub add flutter_riverpod. Of course, you can also simply search for Flutter riverpod and visit the official documentation page or the package page to learn more about how to use this package and how to install it. And with it installed, we can go back to our project here, and in there I'll add a new folder in the lib folder, which I'll name providers, because you might recall that with riverpod you can set up so-called state providers. And in this providers folder, I'll add one new file, which I'll name user places.dart, which will be responsible for managing those places selected by the user or added by the user. Now in this file, you should add an import to this Flutter riverpod package so that we can use its functionality in this file. And then here, I want to add a notifier class, because you might recall that you can create such notifier classes with riverpod to have a class where you can add methods that allow you to manipulate the state that's managed by riverpod. And that's exactly what I want to do here. So I'll add a user places notifier class here, which must extend state notifier, which is a class provided by riverpod. And state notifier is actually a generic class where we should add some annotation that tells riverpod and Dart which kind of data will in the end be managed by our notifier class here. And here the data I do want to manage will be that list of places using my custom place model. And for that, of course, we must import that model by reaching out to our own package, which in my case here is called favorite places, and then there to the models folder and then place Dart. So that's the base setup. In addition, you then must add a constructor function, which doesn't take any parameters, but which must have an initializer list so that we can reach out to the super class by calling super, so to the parent class, and we can pass on our initial state. And the initial state here will be an empty list, and it's actually marked as const because, as you might recall, the state managed by riverpod must not be mutated. You must not edit it in memory. Instead, if you want to add something to it, you should create a new state object, a new list in this case here, that could be based on the old state. But you should not edit the old state directly. And we make sure that we don't accidentally do that, and we instead would see an error if we tried to do it by adding const in front of that list. So with that here, I'm setting up this initial state. And now we can add a method here to this class that allows us to add a new place. For this, I'll add a new addPlace method, where I expect to get some input. To be precise, I want to get my title of the place that should be added. And then in there, the goal is to create a new place object, and then that place object should be added to this list. By the way, if instead of the title, you came up with a solution where you expected the finished place as an input, that would of course also be fine. And in general, of course, your solution will deviate from mine. It's all about practicing though. So by taking a look at my solution, you might get some new ideas, or you might also have some places where you prefer your solution, and that's also absolutely fine. Here, I'll accept a title though, and I'll then create a new place by instantiating my place class and setting the title parameter to the title I'm getting here. With that new place added, we want to add it to our state, and as mentioned, we're not allowed to directly edit that state, so therefore I'll instead set this state property that's provided by state notifier equal to a new list. And in that new list, I'll use that spread operator about which you already learned to spread my old state elements into this new list so that we don't lose them. But in addition, I'll add my new place here, like this, so that it's always at the start of the list. But that's of course optional. With that, we have a method that will update the state, and that's all we need for now. We now just also need to set up a provider, a user places provider, for example, by using the built-in state notifier provider class, which is created like this, which takes a function as an input to its constructor function. And in this function, you automatically get such a ref object, which you could use to listen to other providers, as you learned. But here I'll instead just return a new instance of my user places notifier class like this. And that is all. It's a very simple provider, and right now also a very simple class. With that provider added here, we now have to make it available to the entire app, which can be done from inside the main Dart file, where I now want to import something. For example, I want to import from the Flutter riverpod package the flutter riverpod.dart file. And I'm just organizing my imports such that the package imports come first and then come the custom imports. And now with that import added here, we can go down to Run App and wrap my app with the provider scope widget, which is provided by riverpod. And my app is now simply the child widget that's passed to provider scope. And as you might recall, provider scope simply makes riverpod and the providers we created available inside of our app. So this is needed to be able to access riverpod and its features and our providers from inside of the widgets that make up our app. So with that added here, we can save the main.dart file and now go back to the add place.dart file, because there I now want to use riverpod to add a new place.